Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. I love painting really grim and dark miniatures. I love getting dirty with my oil washes and loads of weathering powders and mud and things like that. And I haven't done quite as much of that recently since my painting of Horus Heresy armies has slowed a little with all the old world stuff that I've been painting, even though I do tend to get a little bit of grime on those miniatures as well. But painting Trench Crusade was the perfect opportunity to not only do that, but focus on sharing it as part of a video as well.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems and offer custom items to suit your club, your event or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
Trench Crusade has long been on my hit list of games to paint for, to try out, and I've got such a busy schedule with all the games that I look at and play, primarily with Warhammer the Old World taking up so much of my time and my heart. It's been really hard to find time to do that. Then more recently, Alex and Carolina of Which Are 3D reached out, and we chat quite a lot about their different 3D printing projects, and they've been on the channel before. But they reached out about their partnership with Fat Rat Miniatures and a new warband that would work for Trench Crusade called the Wind Crusaders. It's built around a Polish-Lithuanian theme. Really, really cool. Showed me some pictures and sent me some miniatures. So let's take a look. So these are the Winged Crusaders. Trench Crusade is a little bit confusing at times, where it can be if you're not part of the community, and I'm only sort of got a couple of toes into it. You have official miniatures, you have compatible with, which have you're allowed to use a badge that says that, and you have all the third-party ones that don't have any official links whatsoever, no badges on, but can absolutely be used in the game. The game started that way, 3D printing, kit bashing, making your own warbands to use with the rules that are free. You can buy hardback rules through the Kickstarter. They're going to be available separately this year, but there's still a core for playing the game in this way, and that's what these miniatures are intended for. They use the Wargamer resin from Warhammer, which is fileable, pretty bendy, and I 3D print a little bit myself. I'm definitely not an expert, but this stuff is pretty good, and I've had other products from Alex and Carolina at Which Are 3D that uses this resin, and as far as resins go is right up there with the best as far as I can tell. Now this is a very quick unboxing here, sped up really quickly because they've sent me loads of extra stuff that's going to appear in other videos, including some terrain and another warband. But as we get into what we're actually here to look at today and paint today, and what we have here is the Expeditionary Force of the Winged Crusaders. We have a set of bases for them. There's an additional set with an Ulan officer, a sniper and a flamer, and then also the big box has the full warband, so to speak. So it's got 3 mechanized hussars, which are these big chunky stomping things, 8 Polish troopers and 4 Lithuanian shock troopers, and then loads of different accessories and weapons. There's quite a lot of sort of choice with the building with these, as you'll see in a moment. Now I don't want unboxing to dominate this video, and if you're not interested in that, you can just speed past the next couple of minutes, and it really only will be a couple of minutes. But I do want to give a little bit of a thought to the miniatures that Which Are 3D that Alex and Carolina have printed, and they're sculpted by Fat Rat Miniatures, so in partnership. This is a partnership they've worked between them to produce this warband that's designed for Trench Crusade. The bases obviously can be used for anything, but they're just very themed to this, and they were great. They're all hollow as well, so you can actually put magnets in the bottom. A lot of resin bases you'd have to drill out. And then when you get to the miniatures, nearly all got slightly sort of different alternative builds, including the Ulan officer as well. It's got a couple of different weapon options. Most of it is one big chunk there, which you get with 3D printed miniatures, but you can swap out the heads and arms and weapons, etc. The prints are all absolutely fantastic quality, no issues with any of them at all, and I do like this resin. There's no promises that it can't break like plastic miniatures can't break. I don't think there's any claim for that, but it is pretty flexible. You can trim it and file it like plastic, which is something you can't always do with 3D prints. They can be very brittle and snap. This isn't like that. It's definitely flexible enough. I did break the odd little thing during this process, but that's very normal. I'd do the same if I was working with a plastic miniature, because I'm just like that. I do that with thin things. But again, if they're slightly bent, you can straighten them with hot water. So it's like working with a really high-end regular resin, which is almost a bit plastic as well. So they're more flexible and stronger, I'd say, than something like Forge World resin, and they're pretty good. No issues at all if you're concerned with this kind of product as the first time you've used it. As you can see from the picture there really is a bucket load of different options, and I wasn't quite sure how to build them. Luckily Alex helped me out via a message, and it sort of matches some of the pictures they'd already sent out, their box art style pictures for the prints. There's no sprues to trim anything off when it's 3D printed like this. You've just got all your bits there ready to go. There's very little clean up. The quality of the prints that I've got here, and they can pretty much go straight together. They don't require washing or anything like that. It's all pre-done with this kind of resin, and as far as I'm aware, so I just got straight down to building and didn't have any issues with it whatsoever. The sculpts are really really fun. I really like the theme. There's an awful lot going on with them. The big mech guys are my favourite for sure. A couple of the miniatures, the proportions are maybe slightly out. It's definitely a new sculptor, but once they're all glued together and they're painted, you don't really notice that. The theme comes through much stronger. But as I said, those big mechs are my absolute favourites. I think they are genuinely really fantastic miniatures. I love my modern day Games Workshop miniatures. They are absolutely beautiful. The sculpts are stunning, but they definitely take an awful lot of putting together, and I did really enjoy, regardless of all the different bits that you see me get out on the desk here. These were incredibly easy to build as part of a system. Got all the bases out, took all the bodies out, lined them up, glued the bodies on first by their feet using super glue, and then put them into their little groups, and then choose which arms were going with which, and just kind of processed all the way along. Proper production line stuff, gluing the weapons on as I went, and I was able to build them all within a couple of hours, about 2 hours from taking them out of the box to having everything ready for priming, which there's no way I could build this many modern Games Workshop miniatures in that amount of time. It would be following each miniature by instructions, and that's not a criticism of Games Workshop miniatures. They are what they are and the way they build, and you get so many benefits from them. But if you're, again, unused to anything other than Games Workshop miniatures and want to give it a go, and you're worried about 3D printed resin, you shouldn't be. You can buy sets like this, and they're really easy to build. You just have to use super glue rather than plastic glue. So this is the gang all lined up, ready to go. So it's the standard set, the bases, and then the little additional set with the officer, the sniper, and the flamer dude. So it really is more than you need, I think, to play a game of Trench Crusade. These are all available now if you're interested in them. But anyway, that's the unboxing side of the video and setting the scene. What I want to do now is show you how I'm going to paint these relatively quickly. So really just a couple of days worth of painting involved in these, no more than an hour or so for each miniature. I've got the John Blanche paint set here that I want to use as a bit of inspiration. I'm definitely not going to stick to just these paints, but I want to look at that as a colour palette and then bring in some of the colour scheme that Alex and Carolina have been working on as well. And I had a little bit of a guide, some things that Alex sent me to do with Polish and Lithuanian World War II armies, and then Carolina has done this artwork for the big mechs as well, which I wanted to make sure that I brought the red in. I didn't bring quite as much in, but I wanted to make sure that I brought some of it into the paint job as well. So I have my black primed miniatures, and I'm starting with a deep rich brown. I'm using the airbrush here. Now, if you don't have an airbrush, you can absolutely just rattle can this brown. I do like to airbrush my brown over a black where possible for a base colour like this, because it really keeps that shadow in all the recesses, which really boosts the way I paint and the style that I paint in. You can also sponge this on, and we'll be doing lots of sponging later on in the video as well. So don't worry about the airbrushing right at the beginning of this video, because there's always an alternative to the airbrushing stages. Very much like this next stage now, and I'm delving into the first of that John Blanche Masterclass 3 set, is the first blue, and it's one of the inspirations for using that set was the Lithuanian troops themselves have got this light blue uniform, and I really like the shades that were in there, and it just goes so lovely over that brown. That brown shows through, and you get this really sort of dull World War II grimy look, and it just really stood out that the brown and that blue were for me the main reason around the palette of this whole warband. And you can achieve this stage without the airbrush if you want to, just by sponging on, and there's lots of demonstrations of that coming up very, very soon in the video. Before that, this is Ashrews, and this is the first of the browns from that John Blanche set, and I'm just going back now over all the troops, so everything else that isn't those Lithuanian troops, and just giving it an extra lift with Zenithal. Again, you could do this with your sponging. I'm going to be building towards some khaki kind of tannish colours for the uniforms on these troops as well, but the brown underneath will be perfect for all the metallics that I'm going to be doing as well. So metallics over brown, if you want to do grimdark, is just absolutely chef's kiss, beautiful stuff. But the real objective of this stage is to start to provide a Zenithal style loose overall highlight on the infantry. When it comes to the mechs, I was working on a couple of small areas that are fabric, but for the troops themselves, you'll do an awful lot more of this because they don't have anywhere near as much armour as the shock troops or those mechs, obviously. And this continues with that next stage now, which is the mocha skin, I believe, in this case, which gives you that kind of khaki-ish look that I'm after. Again, on these mechs, I'm focusing on that little bit of fabric that's showing. The rest of this is all going to be covered with metallic paints in a few moments. I'm also working on the feathers there. The feathers are going to end with a little white tip, but to keep with that overall brownish palette, I want them to have a brown base, and that again just because they've become grimy and dirty over the campaigns in the mud. They're not going to look sort of super shiny and clean like a fresh swan feather or something like that. And as we get on to the Ulan officer, very much the same thing, using the detail with the miniature to sort of build up those layers. On to the sponging now, which is one of the great crazes at the moment. I've got a little cubes of sponge here and a holder from Knott's Hobbies, and these makeup applicators that I actually picked up from Amazon. I'll be using both, and I'm going back to that first blue and one of the other blues from that set, which I'm going to be mixing my palette for highlighting the blue on the Lithuanian troops. So I'm working with them on a dry palette here, doing a 50-50 mix for a bit of a homemade mid-tone, and then the idea is to slowly build up some layers using the sponging. Now, if you don't have too much paint on your sponge, it's very, very subtle the amount of paint that goes on. It seems pretty obvious, but you can really gently touch your miniature with your sponge and lightly build up layers, which gives you something that closely approximates the kind of layering you get with an airbrush. And I say that closely. If you go in really, really heavy with it, it looks like you're doing sort of leaf printing like you might do with a toddler. You've got to be really subtle with it. It takes a little while to get used to how much paint to have on the sponge and how much pressure to give, but you can build really nice smooth transitions which don't require wet blending, don't require loads and loads of brushwork, and it's an awful lot quicker. And if you're going to be covering your miniatures in lots and lots of oil washes and weathering like I am later on in this video, then a method like this is absolutely perfect because it really speeds up the production line of getting your miniatures painted quickly, which is exactly what you need while working on something that you want to look really, really grim and dark like this. You see here, I'm using one of the smaller sponges with a little tip on it. It's kind of an egg with a point, and I'm just using the lightest shade that I've mixed just to add a little bit of highlight. And if I'm really gentle and subtle like that, you can do quite a thin line with it. And again, as I've already said, it just gives you a little bit of a smoother transition than some brushwork would. The mocha skin I've already used through the airbrush, and I've got a highlight to go in there as well, and I'm going to repeat the process that I just have with the blues, and in both cases with the blue and this tan colour that I'm working on now, I've returned to the same colour that I used through the airbrush. The airbrush puts really, really thin layers of paint down, so unless you repeat it loads and loads of times, the strength of that colour will look a little bit weaker, and that's deliberately so. But by adding with the sponge now, it just increases that colour, so it looks like like you're highlighting, but you're actually just adding more and more of the same color, but it's a lot more intense in certain areas. So I'm really focusing very deliberately on the larger patterns where the light might catch the most, so you're leaving all that dark in the recesses. And you can't get into the recesses with these sponges either, so it kind of helps you out a little bit there. It tends to settle on the tops of the detail unless you press really hard and change the angle of the miniature a lot. So very good for doing sort of directional light based highlighting, just by dabbing away like this and really working at it. And as I've already mentioned, I'm going to filter this all back down with oil washes at the end anyway, so if there are any areas I think that looks a little bit too bright, a little bit too stark, that's not really going to be the issue. In many ways I need to go a little bit brighter than I might normally, because I want to make sure that it's still got enough of that vibrance in the highlight that's showing through the later oil washes and filters that I'm going to apply. And I found myself swapping between the little egg-shaped sponge and also the little white cube as well. The cube comes in really handy later on when I'm doing some of the armor, because the straight edges are really good for keeping to a line as and when you need it, but you can also tear these to give yourself different textures as well. There's so many different possibilities, and this video is not really going to explore that in too much detail. I really want to sort of keep focused on the product in hand. Hopefully you can see how this process works over the brown though, by lightly adding some sponged on highlights, that it's almost your other halves or your wearers of makeup in your family might be able to tell you more about why this works so well. But I'm just adding volume here by adding lighter colors where the light would generally hit on the miniature, knowing that I'm going to tone it down with filters later on. Keeping it quite simple with two metallics here, one dark base color and then one for the brighter highlights. I quite often like to start with brown metallics. If you watch a lot of my videos, I don't need to do that here because I've already got that brown base on the miniature, which was what I was talking about a little bit earlier on. I'm deliberately leaving brown showing in quite a lot of the recesses here because it gives you a really nice dirty rusty looking sort of recess to your metal, which is a really nice effect and one you can use anyway. Works brilliantly on tank tracks, for example, just by using this sponging tool here. This is the one from Knott's Hobbies. There is a link in the video description for this one. It's not an affiliate link. I don't get a financial kickback at all. It's a small UK company, but at least he knows that you've come via one of my videos. It's just nice to see that sales grow for small independent wargaming suppliers in the UK, and he makes a few products and I really like this one. But by sponging it on the miniature like this, not worrying about getting in onto those recesses, leaving that brown in there because it creates such a nice effect, you can build up the metallic armor on this miniature in absolutely no time at all. And as I've already mentioned a little bit earlier on, that straight edge really helps when I'm going up against an area that I don't want to get the metallic on, because I can make sure that I line that edge up against it so I don't press too hard and you don't get the paint where you don't want it. So it's really quite handy, and it just takes no time whatsoever. The effect is really pleasing. You don't get any brush marks at all because the sponge doesn't leave any, and these sponges are all really quite dense. If you want to create a chipping effect or something, you might want a traditional style of sponge that you might have in your blister packs, that kind of thing, but this, it really is building up volumes via layers. When it comes to the normal troopers as well, I even used it to put down not all but quite a lot of the base layer of the metals on their weapons, knowing that I can go back and touch up any brown areas that I accidentally get some on, and it just saves me time in the long run. Of course I do need to grab out the hairy brush because there's just some areas you can't get to, little bits of chainmail in between the legs underneath the cloth there, little touches on around the weapons mostly, which you just can't get to with the sponging in between these sort of winged things on the tops of the mechs as well. There was no chance I was going to get the sponge in there with them assembled. But overall, the time you can save by using the sponging to get the most of your layers down is really great. This is a little bit on the tail of the horse here, which is clearly supposed to be leather or something, tying the tail up, but I really like the idea of painting it as a metallic frame. It's kind of grim and brutal, but everything about this world and this warband is grim and brutal. By the time I get to that shinier, brighter silver, I'm being a little bit more deliberate about it, but still sponging, making sure that I'm hitting the top sort of half or third of some of the larger armor plates, very much on the shoulder pads. along the edges on the top of the helmet, and you just get this nice transition between the dark brown that was the base color and the darker steel, and then the brighter steel on the top. And again, there's no edge highlighting here. You don't have to do any dry brushing. You can very much capture just the edges if you want to with the sponges, and the overall effect, I just love it. I think it's really fantastic. It's super simple and super easy. Can you tell I like it? The next stage was in part a touch up with any little bits of metallic, but it also just add a touch of highlight, a very basic highlight to the weapon stocks. There's very little leather showing, and I've painted a lot of that tan already, so that wasn't an awful lot to pick out on here, but there's little wooden areas on the weapons that I wanted to pick out, so it's kind of a touch up with a darker brown anywhere that the metallic paint has got onto, and it wasn't too much, and then a little bit of the brighter orangey brown there just to sort of catch the top edges of butts of rifles, that kind of thing. And then similar with the webbing really, and the straps, just a little touch up here or there, and then adding a little bit of a highlight of the brighter colour, knowing that I'm going to be knocking them all back down again afterwards. I was really rough with this, just slapping the paint on in many cases. And I don't want this at any point to be confused with that Blanchitsu style. I know I'm using a John Blanche paint set. I'm not claiming this style is Blanchitsu at all. It has its own artistic, stylistic elements to it. This isn't that. This is just deliberately rough painting. I'm not going to claim it's Blanchitsu because it's rough. I think they are completely different things. I think he thinks that as well. This is just deliberately rough painting, knowing that I'm going to be adding filters and weathering over the top, so it won't really matter to the overall effect of the miniatures. So this is an on-off white. I'm using Trooper White from Tooth & Coats, but you can use any, and I'm just adding a little bit of a whiter colour to the end of those feathers. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier on that in Carolina's artwork they are white, so I wanted to at least have an element of that there. I didn't want to say that I'd paint them a different colour for any other reason, that they're grim and dirty, but they're still white on the edges of them, and I like the idea that over time they just got saturated with filth and smoke and grime and dirt. But while I've got the white out and my sponges out, I'm using it to do a little bit of underpainting here. There are elements on the horse's mane and even on the tops of the horse's rump there that I wanted to give it a little bit of a lift in terms of lighting, knowing that I'm going to put a contrast paint over those in a moment. So rather than dry brushing, which I might do at that stage, or zenithal with the airbrush, you can do quite a good zenithal with sponging as well. So those of you who follow a lot of my tutorials where I do zenithal, you don't have an airbrush, then a black and then using a sponge like this to do your zenithal is definitely another option for you. And I'm just continuing that round here on some of the other miniatures, adding a little bit to some of the wooden planks, picking out some of the skulls on their bases as well, just giving them a little subtle lift using that off-white. A couple of the bases have some concrete on there, and I thought it'd be better to add a little bit of grey to that rather than everything just being pure brown. Still fits in with the overall colour palette quite nicely as well. So again, some very loose sponging on some of the edges, leaving loads of the brown in where I couldn't sponge. I had to grab the hairy brush out, but again, slapping the paint on pretty loosely, not worrying about a nice overall covering, knowing that my oil washes are going to save all of the rough painting here. And then onto sponging again, because there's loads of bricks on about half of the bases, so loose rubble bricks. So I thought it'd be really nice to have kind of a bright orangey colour, brick colour in there. Again, it's not too far from the extended palette from that John Blanche set. If I was thinking about the kind of colours that go into it, everything's quite desaturated, which I really like. A few of the bricks I'm painting in with that grey as well. And then we're on to a wash, and I don't use washes very often, but this is a purple wash which is in that John Blanche set as well. I'm using it as the base for all of the flags and sashes, which I'm going to be using as the red spot colour based on Carolina's original artwork. I've changed the clothing a little bit. I kept the tan for these mechs on the little bit of clothing that's there, but I am carrying the red over to those flags, and I thought by adding a little bit of the purple there as a nice undertone for red, which works very well. It's a way of getting some more of that colour palette that I'm working on onto those miniatures. While I'm in washes and contrast paints, this is Ghillie Dew. It's a little bit of a greenish colour, so I've got it in the little palette there. And I'm just adding it to a lot of the wooden planks that are on the other half of the bases that don't have all of the bricks on, and they've got some crosses on some of the bases as well, and it just runs into all of the detail that's on there. They're a semi-zenithal with the brown. I've got some white sponging on there. I'm also painting a little bit of green sloshing into the ground as if there's sort of mossy areas, and just being quite liberal with it, just picking up and deciding to slap it on as and where I like. This is Dusk Red, which is a colour I've started to like painting my horses, bizarrely enough, but it works quite well once it's on there. It flows quite nicely into all those recesses and gives you quite a smooth finish for a paint like this. Hence all the underpainting on that horse earlier and giving that little light a boost on its rump there, and you can see the effect that it's giving you. There's a nice kind of up-layered highlight on the larger areas of the horse, because I'm not going back and doing any future highlights on it. And then a little bit of grim black just to paint in over the mane and the tail of the horse, and again is the reason why I did that little bit of underpainting with a sponge to pick out the detail on the fur a little earlier on. Sticking with the contrast speed paint kind of layers, this is Skeleton Horde, one of my favourites, and I'm using it to go over all of those webbing areas. Remember I mentioned how roughly I painted some of the highlights on, knowing that I would add future layers to it, and this is exactly what I'm doing here by glazing over the top of these, allowing it to run into all the recesses. Also smooths down those top highlights and makes them look a little bit more deliberate, and overall tidies it up quite a lot. Of course, as I've already mentioned loads of times, I'll be adding oil washes as well to add a further filter to this, but this just knocks back a lot of those rougher sponge marks, rougher highlights, and really starts to tie it all together a little bit more. So I've got the purple washes now dry. I can go back in with the reds, and I've just chosen a couple of reds. So one's the base layer, almost I think from one of their flexible triads, the basilisk red. And then after that I'm going to sponge on again a slightly brighter red to make it pop. I'm still keeping it really dark in all those shadows. I'm still making sure that it doesn't go too bright and vibrant because of that overall desaturated palette feel. And this colour that I'm using now, this brighter red, is probably the one that breaks away most from that overall palette and feel, and that's why I wanted to limit how much of it was in the warband, hence avoiding the larger areas of clothing on those mechs, keeping it just to the sashes and to the top of the banner there as well. I really wanted to get that red in there, but I didn't want to sort of offset that whole desaturated palette, and I think I've just about got away with it. A few of the miniatures have their faces out and don't have them in gas masks, etc., and then nearly all of them you can be painted with them with gloves if you wanted to, but I've decided to paint a lot of them without gloves, and it gives a little bit of a contrast to all of that sort of cold steel and grim uniform, that there is a little bit of humanity in there. So just a little bit of flesh showing, might just be the hands. I've added a couple of layers first, including the first highlight, and then wash back with this flesh wash. Again, a much quicker way of painting skin than I would normally do, and I've not painted any eyes in apart from on this big mech here. Most of the sculpts of the eyes are pretty much hidden under the brims of their caps. On the medic guy here, just looks like his eyes are slightly closed, and it looked cool, so I left it. Now I think this next stage is quite important with what I'm going to do, and this is giving it an all over varnish. I've gone for a sort of a semi-gloss effect here, a bit of a satin effect, which will do enough to protect it, which will mean hopefully that I don't need to go back and do too much of a matte varnish afterwards, because I'm covering everything in oil washes. Now if it's just the metallic areas, I probably wouldn't have bothered with the varnishing. Metallic paints are usually quite robust, but because there's so many fabric areas here, so organic areas, there's fabric uniform, there's even the feathers and things, and because I'm pretty much doing a oil wash all over the whole miniature, I wanted to protect it, because otherwise the thinner in those oils will just strip your paint off essentially, and you'll end up rubbing away at the oil paints when you buff them back off a little bit later, and you'll end up with black prime showing through, which is really depressing when that happens. So it's well worth protecting them first and making sure that you let your varnishes fully dry. If you're going to do it via a rattle can, probably go for a satin or a matte, because the gloss varnishes through rattle cans tend to be really thick and detail colours if you don't have an airbrush. Obviously I was using an airbrush for those stages, but I am covering almost the entire miniature in the oil wash, being quite thick in places, especially on the bases as well. Being a little bit more careful on the fabric areas, just giving it a steady coat, but one by one working my way through them all. And as you can see me splattering my desk, that's how much care I'm taking, adding this oil wash all over the miniatures. I'm using a pre-mixed one. You can mix them yourself. If you do mix them yourself, make sure you're using artist thinners, you're using Sansador, you're using fast dry thinners made for artists who make paint miniatures, not something from your DIY store. It will go very, very wrong very quick if you use something that strong. You'll definitely take your paint off regardless, and your varnish off if it's just an airbrush one. And then I have my ABT, my fast dry thinner from AK, and a big soft bit of sponge. I start just by rubbing off the slightly sort of damp oil paints. I like to wait a few hours before I take them off. You can wait overnight. Oil paints take absolutely forever to fully cure, at least 24 hours if not longer, and all you need is a little bit of thinner to sort of waking it back up again as well. So with these, about 2-3 hours worth of drying time, so they're dry to the touch all over but tacky underneath. You start wiping away and you're almost buffing it off, and it leaves it all in the recess. It adds a nice grimy filter over the whole miniature, which is exactly what I'm going for the overall look of this army. I won't normally cover my entire miniature unless it's just pure armor in this kind of oil wash, but I really wanted to go for that look, that palette, that feel for this force, and also add to the speed paint nature of this whole thing. I am being a little bit careful in case I do take any paint off, so I'm keeping an eye on all the time what I'm doing, because if the paint starts to come off, I will stop and let it dry a little bit longer. But I didn't have any issues here at all, and it just comes off really nicely, and I love the effect that it gives. It's worth being a little bit careful that you don't snap anything off when you're doing this. So just think about how strong certain elements of miniatures are. Maybe support them with a finger or something. If you are rubbing a thin, delicate piece, just give it a little bit of thought. And you can also use cotton buds, Q-tips, to get into some of those smaller areas if your sponge is too big. And then for the final stages, I did dip my sponge in a little bit of that thinner, just to take it off areas a little bit more stubborn, mostly on the tops of armor panels like this, where I wanted them just to add a little bit more shine or clean up a little bit on those lower skirts of fabric there. But again, you don't really have to do it, but it depends how dry your oil paints have become. Very much into the lots of fun with final effects stage now. I'm using a little bit of Dirty Down Rust. It's great stuff. You may have seen it in lots of videos I've done before and loads of other people's videos as well. It's not cheap, but it does last a long time. If you can stipple it on, if you apply it really thick, it looks very dry and orangey. You can thin it down and you can paint streaks with it. It's really quite versatile and the easiest overall rust effect that I've ever used. I just like the ability just to stick a brush in there and go. It is water based, but it's definitely pretty toxic as well. You want to be using old brushes with it. Don't be using any of your best ones, but there's some really nice effects to be had by adding it to armies like this. Really, it just adds to that overall grim and almost desperate feel of the overall theme of the army. Little streaks of rust down the concrete slabs where you got the metal girders sticking out. All of the areas of barbed wire look really great with a little bits of rust running off into the wet ground as well. You can really start to think about how grim and horrible you make the environment for the miniatures. Using a couple of my favourite pigments. These are AK pigments. I find them really quite greasy, which means they hold on to the miniature really well. I don't tend to fix my pigments when I'm using them on bases in this way. I just blow the excess off. I like the effect and they just stay there. You don't need to worry about it too much. With some brands, and it's not a criticism of them at all, but with some brands they're a lot sort of more dusty and lighter. They would tend to come away a little bit more over time, but these AK ones maybe not quite as easy to blend or smooth out because of their greasiness, but they tend to hold on the miniature as well, and you can build up these really, really nice effects just by putting them on in spots and blending them out. And it's perfect between all this dusty brick rubble to really add effects to the environment. Dear Armour FX Thick Mud from Vallejo. I love this product, and it really is designed to be used as kind of thick trench mud or mud that's stuck in tank tracks. It is an effect rather than like a basing paste, if you use those things as well, which I do. This is fibrous, and if you apply it thick it tends to look really wet. If you apply it very thin it looks like almost dried mud, and I'm just splattering it all over here quite liberally all over the bases to really tie it all in, and then also up the miniatures as well. I like the idea that they're walking through these wet horrible trenches. You can cover over areas you've not even bothered to paint, like the hooves on this horse, knowing that I was going to do this, just splattering it all the way up the leg quite far, covering anything that you don't think looks quite right. A little highlight looks too bright, or a little bit you've mispainted, or something like that. You can cover a multitude of sins with this kind of effect, and that is part of what this project is about as well, showing you that if you paint a sort of really grim, grimy, dark looking force like this, that you can get away with cutting a lot of corners with the actual painting and making them back up with all these effects, which people will be impressed by looking at the overall look of the miniature and not realizing how little you've actually bothered to highlight certain areas because you knew you're going to cover it. A little bit of black rim on the bases, and here we are with the finished set. And I didn't time it exactly, but it was very much a couple of days work to paint them all, which isn't too bad at all with this number of miniatures. It definitely would have taken longer if I was working individually on each miniature, highlighting in a more standard way, if they had a lot more faces showing that I needed to paint eyes. There's lots about this collection that made it easier for me to paint. The limited palette helps, the amount of metal areas on the miniatures help as well, and hopefully you've seen that you can have a pretty cool looking Trench Crusade style warband without actually having to be a very skillful painter at all, because I'm using lots of effects and techniques here. But I think there are things that you can very easily learn and you can teach people quite easily, especially the sponging side of things. Some of it's learning about light placement and thinking about colours and all of that. I get that side of things, but I'd imagine that if you were watching this at home and you're a little bit concerned about your painting and you want to develop, you could copy something like this very easily, using the sponging techniques, using the oil washes and all of the different effects and things that I've used, which I think are great tools to use and easy things to help your miniatures look great, without necessarily being the best painter skill-wise overall, the most artistic painter. And there's definitely many different ways you can approach miniature painting, and there are methods and tools out there now that means you can have great looking sets of miniatures to play games with without necessarily being the most technically brilliant painter. And that's very much what I've aimed to show you in this video, that I'm not using an awful lot of technical skill here. I've just learned how to use certain techniques and products to really bring them to the fore and make something that looks quite impressive. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you again to Alex and Carolina of Witch Heart 3D for sending over the wonderful miniatures and all the other miniatures I've got that are going to be related to this video in the follow-up terrain videos and maybe beyond after that as well, and also to Fat Rat Miniatures for the designs on those miniatures. Really, really cool to receive them and help me bring this video to you. I hope there's lots of things you can take from this video, be it the tutorial side, the painting of the miniatures in that grimdark style and using all of the sponging and techniques like that, and show how you can quite quickly get a really grim and dark and dirty warband on the table, be that for Trench Crusade or any other similar game systems, or just take those techniques to your Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer Old World, your Heresy, your 40k armies. And there's so many possibilities for this style of painting if you want that grim, dark and dirty kind of look. It's also given you the opportunity to see some alternative Trench Crusade products. There's loads and loads out there, and if you like what you've seen in this video, please do check out the links to Witch Heart 3D and look at the stuff that they can provide, be it this range or the other miniatures they print as well. If you're still watching, you probably enjoyed the video, hopefully. So if you have, please do comment below, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel. All that algorithm boosting stuff generally really helps. So if you enjoy what I do and you want other people to see it, that is one of the best ways you can support me. If you'd like to support me even further, please do check out the Patreon as well. It starts at £1, so a nice low level tier there to start you off, and higher tiers with lots of extra benefits as well. Check out the channel sponsor, Counterattack Bases, for loads and loads of gaming aids and lots of different game systems, as well as custom dice. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.